The man who refused to die. Have you ever heard of a man who simply refused to die? This is the story of Musa, a man whose fate was sealed by death itself, yet he defied it with every ounce of his being. But what happens when death cannot claim you, no matter how much it tries? It all began on a stormy night in the heart of a village in the Nigerian savannah. The wind howled fiercely, shaking the tall trees and sending dust clouds into the air. Musa, an old man who had lived through many storms, sat calmly inside his hut. His eyes, though weary, had seen it all, the rise and fall of many kings, the birth and death of countless souls. Yet, on this night, something was different. Something unnatural. As he sat by the fire, the shaman of the village, known for his deep connection with the spirits, came rushing in. His face was pale, and his breath came in short gasps. "Musa, the spirits have spoken," he said, his voice trembling. "Death is on its way for you tonight. I can feel it in the winds." Musa looked at him with a knowing smile. "I have lived a long life, shaman, but I do not fear death. I have not yet finished what I came to do." The shaman stepped back, confused. He had heard tales of a man who could cheat death, but he had never truly believed them. Yet, the words of the spirits rang in his ears. "This is no ordinary death, Musa," the shaman whispered, "this is a death that cannot be avoided. You have no choice." Musa chuckled softly and reached for his walking stick, rising slowly from his seat. "Then I will refuse it," he said, his voice firm. The shaman looked at him with fear in his eyes. "But Musa, you cannot fight death. It is not just an enemy you can see. It is the end of all things, the force that governs all of life." Musa turned toward the shaman, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "I will fight it with every breath I have." The winds outside howled louder, and in that moment, a strange silence fell over the hut. The shaman felt the air grow cold, as if a great power was moving toward them. But before he could speak again, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Suddenly, the door slammed open, and there stood a dark figure, cloaked in shadows. It was death itself. The figure stepped into the hut, and a chill swept over the room. Musa stood tall, unafraid, his hands gripped tightly around his staff. "I have heard that you come for me tonight," he said, his voice unwavering. "But I will not go without a fight." The figure did not speak, but simply raised one bony hand, and the room grew even colder. "I will not die tonight," Musa repeated, stepping forward with resolve. The shaman trembled in fear, but he could not move, his body frozen by the overwhelming power of the figure. Musa, however, stood firm, his heart racing, but his mind clear. And then, with a sudden flash of light, the figure reached out with icy fingers, grasping for Musa's soul. But Musa was quick. With a forceful movement, he raised his staff high, and a blinding light erupted from it. The figure shrieked, recoiling from the power that poured from the old man. For the first time in his life, death hesitated. "You cannot stop me forever, Musa," the figure intoned, its voice cold and hollow. "I have come for you, and I will return." With that, death vanished into the air, leaving only the scent of earth and decay behind. The hut was silent once more. Musa, though shaken, was still standing. The shaman, still frozen in place, could hardly comprehend what had just occurred. But Musa simply smiled, knowing that his fight had only just begun. The shaman slowly stepped forward, his eyes wide with awe. "Musa, you defied death." Musa nodded slowly. "Death came for me, but I refused. As long as I have unfinished business, it will not take me." And so, Musa continued to live, despite death's attempts to claim him. Each night, as the moon rose high in the sky, death would return, and each night, Musa would fight it off. It became a battle that shook the heavens, a battle of wills. But then, one fateful evening, as Musa sat in his hut, something shifted in the air. The wind began to howl louder than ever before, and the shaman felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "Musa, I fear this is not the end of this story," he whispered, his voice trembling. Musa stood, ready for whatever would come. But what happened next was something even the shaman could not have foretold. What happens when death returns once more, stronger than ever? Will Musa be able to refuse death again? The night was still, too still. Musa stood by his fire, the shadows flickering eerily on the walls of his hut. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the cold whispers of the spirits. The air had thickened, and the once clear sky was now covered in dark clouds, as if the heavens themselves were watching Musa struggle against fate. He could feel it, the presence of death, drawing nearer. The shaman, who had once been full of questions, now sat trembling in the corner of the hut, his eyes wide with fear. "Musa, I fear this time will be different," he said in a strained voice. "You may have defeated death once, but now it's coming for you with a vengeance." Musa did not answer. Instead, he stood tall, his heart steady, his hands tightly gripping his staff. He had refused death time and time again, and now, he would do it again. But he knew deep down that this time would not be easy. Death was not the same as before. There was a darkness in the air, a weight that hung heavy in the hut. The door creaked open. A cold wind blew in, extinguishing the flames of the fire. The room was plunged into darkness, and the shaman gasped in horror. Before him stood death, but this time, it was not just the shadowy figure he had encountered before. It was different. It was larger, more terrifying, and its presence consumed the room. Death's voice was cold, its tone full of authority. "Musa, you have lived long enough. Your time has come." The shaman could barely stand to look at the figure. But Musa, standing tall, did not flinch. "I have unfinished business. You will not take me tonight, Death." Death reached out with its skeletal hand, its cold fingers almost touching Musa's chest. The air grew colder, the room swirling with an unnatural chill. "I have waited long enough, Musa. You will not refuse me this time." Musa's heart raced, but his voice remained steady. "I have lived many years, and in those years, I have learned that death is just a part of life. But I will not allow it to take me until I have finished my purpose." For a moment, Death hesitated, its bony hand hovering in the air. It seemed to ponder Musa's words. Then, with a sudden movement, it raised both hands, and the room shook violently. The earth beneath Musa's feet cracked, and the very walls of the hut seemed to tremble. But Musa stood firm. His staff glowed with an otherworldly light. With every ounce of energy he had left, he thrust the staff into the ground. The earth trembled in response, but death was not finished. Suddenly, a deafening roar erupted from the ground, and a massive shadow formed in the center of the room. The shadow grew larger and larger, its shape shifting into that of a monstrous beast, an embodiment of fate itself. The shaman screamed in terror, covering his eyes as the room seemed to warp and twist. But Musa's eyes were fixed on the beast, unwavering. His voice broke through the chaos. "I refuse to be controlled by fate, by death. I will fight." Death laughed, a hollow, eerie sound that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the hut. "You cannot fight fate, old man. You will bow before me, as all must." The ground beneath Musa's feet cracked open wider, and from the depth of the earth, dark tendrils shot up, wrapping around his legs, pulling him downward. The shaman, his eyes wide with fear, watched helplessly as Musa struggled against the dark force that sought to pull him into the abyss. "Musa, you cannot win," the shaman cried. "Fate is too strong for you." But Musa, his body straining against the dark tendrils, spoke with a voice that rang out like thunder, I will not bow to fate, for I am the master of my own destiny. In that moment, Musa's staff began to glow brighter than ever before, and with a mighty cry, he thrust it into the ground with all his strength. The earth shook violently, and the shadowy beast let out an ear-piercing screech. It recoiled, its form flickering in and out of existence, as if the light from Musa's staff was burning it away. But the darkness would not yield easily. The shadow beast lunged at Musa, and with a fierce tug, it dragged him down into the dark abyss. The shaman screamed, reaching out for Musa, but the darkness was too powerful. Musa was disappearing, swallowed by the very fate he had tried to escape. The shaman fell to his knees, heartbroken and trembling. He whispered a prayer to the spirits, his voice barely audible above the noise of the storm. But then, just as the darkness seemed to claim Musa completely, something extraordinary happened. A flash of light, brilliant and pure, shot up from the depth of the earth, enveloping the entire hut. The shadow beast let out another scream, this one filled with fury and defeat. For a moment, everything was still. Then, from the center of the glowing light, Musa emerged, his eyes fierce with the will to live. The dark tendrils that had once held him now crumbled to dust, and the shadow beast was gone, scattered into the wind. Musa stood tall, his body exhausted, but his spirit unbroken. He had refused death, once again. But as the light faded, Musa knew this was not the end. Death would return. And next time, would he be able to fight it off again? Or had he angered fate in a way that could never be undone? What happens when Musa faces death again? Will he be able to overcome fate, or is his journey finally reaching its end?